Thank you very kindly. At this time, our last 25 minutes, and this public hearing will be over. Again, we want to thank the citizens that are here right now. Because this issue of community development corporations are so important, the Vice Chair, Amy Murray, and myself, we felt that we needed to bring forth a presentation, and they're going to share half of the 25 minutes. So if Ms. Patricia Garry can come at this time for your presentation. Yes, come on, I want you to go first. Absolutely, because this is very important. This is very, very important, and all of the comments that have been made today are very important. Again, over the weekend, I had a chance to go to the homes of some of my colleagues, Mr. Smitherman, Amy Murray, and knocked on Mr. Sittenfield's door, but he wasn't at home. But nevertheless, I had a chance, with Vice Mayor David Mann at his law office, and communicated with pretty much most of my colleagues here. I tried to get Mr. Seelbach.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
You didn't come by my house.
Oh, well, I can come tonight. How's that? We'll just talk about it. We'll just come tonight. Matter of fact, I'm coming for dinner tonight. Is that okay? Okay. Why community development matters. Matter of fact, I've been on this council for 4 years, and I've never seen a chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee or the vice chair of a Budget and Finance Committee to ever break protocol to allow a citizen group to come tonight, because this is so important to all of us. I do want to thank Council Member Seelbach. He was the first person that really, one of the first persons that really advanced the issue that we've got to reassess the funding. But over the weekend, Amy Murray, Councilmember Amy Murray, was so diligent behind the scenes working with the administration and the mayor and all of us to at least make certain that we increased or restored some of the funds. It's not over until it's over, and it's not over because what we're going to do, even after the budget, community development corporations will become a priority. It is a priority for the city. So we want to thank you all for giving us grace and working with us through this tough budget. So at this time, Patricia Garry is going to speak, and we are going to allow her to talk.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can I just make one comment?
Yes, you can.
I appreciate your sentiment because I think we all want to fund community programs that work. Unfortunately, my motion for the CMBDU restoration of 500 identified a funding source from the $500,000 from the early loan payment from the fourth reserve at Fourth. Somehow between me submitting my motion and it being put in the omnibus motion, it was stripped of that funding source and just said, administration, please identify how we can pay for this, which means they will have to identify cuts to other programs. I think that's unfortunate because the $500,000 that I identified is now going to be used for two programs that we've never funded before, and we've never had presentations on why they deserve taxpayer-funded money. So I appreciate your sentiment, but to be honest with these people, the money is not identified of even how we will restore $500,000, much less the $1 million that all of these projects in Pleasant Ridge, Clifton, Mount Airy, Walnut Hills, O'Brienville, Columbia, Tusculum, and others would receive through a competitive bid process that takes the power out of our hands and puts it back into the hands of the community. So appreciate the sentiment, but I just want to make sure everyone's clear on what is actually being proposed to vote on from this council.
Yes, and I thank you, Councilmember Seelbach. However, just to bring a little clarity here, as chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee, along with my illustrious vice chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, I did not receive in my hands, we understood the policies of 5 votes for Mr. Seelbach's presentation. I didn't get that motion until, I don't know, after we have probably put the omnibus motion together. So no one was trying to do anything malicious or sinister to Mr. Seelbach in any kind of way. He just didn't have 5 votes. And so we were able to pull 5 votes together. Matter of fact, we have 6 votes to even restore it, and the money will be there as 6 members sign it. But I want to thank Mr. Silbach for really his initial leadership on it, and he deserves credit for that. Dear Ms. Patricia Garry, who I've always loved and admired, I've known you as Pat Crumb.
I know.
But
I knew you were going to have to
you know, I had to say that tonight. But you have the privilege of the floor for the next 10, 15 minutes. And then after that, our final presentation of 10 minutes by the administration, and then we adjourn. Thank you. You have the privilege of the floor.
Thank you, Finance Chair Reverend Winburn. Thank you, members of council, for being here. And we are really appreciate this opportunity and worked hard to keep it concise and make it clear. We are here to talk about the fact of the need for continuing investment, for not cutting the pipeline, which we think some of the moves in this budget does, which will set things back not just 2 years, but maybe even 5 years. And we want the pie to be bigger. Even we understand shrinking resources. We need to be creative. We need to find new ways. We need to work with the administration and with people around the country. We need to continue to make these investments. So I don't know if you can see the presentation that we're doing, but at any rate. So there are actually 46 CDCs in this region. 36 of them are within the city limits of Cincinnati. CDCs really started, Bobby Kennedy started them in a 64 in Bed-Stuy in New York. They got to Cincinnati in 68 with Carl Westmoreland. A bunch of us started our CDCs in the 70s. And they have been, when the private market walked out of our communities, the communities stepped up themselves and had to find ways to make things happen. And that's where CDCs come from. Now there are CDCs actually in better off neighborhoods because they want that ability to make those partnerships and to draw us on some of those funds. But it started out when there was nobody in Bond Hill going to do a thing except what they wanted, and nobody was going to talk to the neighborhood. And, you know, we got busy. So we created our plans, we made our vision, and then worked to make it a reality. A CDC is actually the physical development arm of the community. And they do blighted abandoned buildings. For years, we've done a lot of housing. Now there's a lot of emphasis on doing the housing, but also on doing neighborhood business districts, economic development, and more dense development. So there are a lot of different ways that CDCs work. We're just going to show you a couple of examples. The one on the left is Camp Washington, and it was really not the worst house in the neighborhood, but it was a pretty bad house. $30,000 from the city. What we need from you in general is gap financing. We just need a little chunk to help make the deal work. $30,000, $75,000 from the neighborhood. We got that house there, and as an earlier speaker said, that house fixed up the whole rest of the block on both sides of the street, just because it was invested in, new neighbors came in, and other people began to invest. This was, and you may not even remember it, but it was Chase and Ferguson Northside, and people were killed in front of this building. People were killed in the playground across the street, and it was the worst site in the city for several years. The neighborhood got hold of it. The neighborhood tore that down, put up 2 new green and sustainable buildings, had grant money, national grant money to help make that happen, and now kids can actually play in that playground across the street. So we're very proud of that. This is Clifton Heights. I don't know how many of you remember what this looked like. You could see Holmes High School stood out. Everything else was just a jumble of ugliness and fast food. Oh, what did I say? Oh my God. I apologize. You're absolutely right. That is not Holmes High School. This is what it looks like today. And last year, this project was our project of the year at our awards celebration. You can see why. This, of course, this just bare, naked land, was what that whole block looked like for almost 10 years, with court fights and all kinds of things. This is what it looks like today. It's really a neighborhood gathering spot for the whole UC community. It's always hopping, there's always things going on, and it is safe, peaceful, fun, and a happy place to be. These are the tools we use to make a difference. These are the tools we use to create all the work we do to benefit you, to benefit the city, to benefit the neighborhoods. The operating support we are passing through this year from you $420,000 in federal funds to 10 CDCs, which we do through a competitive process, and which we will start up again in October for 2015. Tax increment financing is critical. All those tax credits are good. The neighborhood housing initiatives Paul Rudemiller spoke to earlier. Single Family Support Fund is a creative program the city came up with using home funds. The Neighborhood Business District Improvement Funds, everybody has spoken to that. I think we all agree how important that is. The Port Authority has been a great partner for neighborhoods. They have ideas, they come to us. We have ideas, we go to them. We've worked things out, and they just really listen. They really work well, and I think we're producing some great work beyond that. The private partnerships, that's really what probably 85% of our developments are funded by private things, whether it's a for-profit developer, whether it's a grant, whether it's private investors of various kinds. So, and I think the $7 to $1 that Mike Wagner says is probably right, might even be a little bit more for some of these big projects. And of course, the Moving Ohio Forward funds that we have used in our neighborhoods. Now the port is, we're all kind of considering we've gotten the worst out of the way, let's get back to rehab. So here's what we want to do in the future. This is, you may have seen Madisonville's picture, but they are planning that in 5 or 6 years, Wetzel Avenue is going to, you're not going to believe Wetzel Avenue, and you're not going to believe the quality of food you can get there and the coffee shop. And there's already a wonderful drawing studio that's drawing people who've never been to Madisonville, and they're going to build on that. That's a really smart neighborhood. This is a greenhouse that part of your operating support funds created the design for, but done by a local architect. It's green and sustainable. It can vary in size. It can vary in the outside stuff, so it'll look different in different neighborhoods, and there are like 3 neighborhoods looking at it right now. These are the kind of exciting things we want to do in the future. And what we're worried about is that these cuts, which look, they don't look like that much. They don't look that awful. And then the TIF thing moving around, and then moving around the affordable housing, and maybe none of it looks like very much. But what I'm worried about is it's going to cut the pipeline. And when a neighborhood has a project, when Walnut Hills, which has a bunch of big projects almost ready to go right now. So Walnut Hills, you've got your developer, you've got your construction financing, you've got your takeout financing from a bank, you've got all these pieces of state money, city money. You've got this pro forma with 15 line items on it. If that can't be funded when it's ready, then everybody disappears. I mean, the bank goes away, the developer goes away, the takeout financing, everything is gone, and it's going to take 4 to 6 years to put that back together if it ever gets put back together. So that's what we're worried about. It cannot just disappear. And I know, even in this time, that we have to find a way to increase investment. We got to get creative. We got to find a way to do it. Neighborhood building density is going to increase with the new developments that people are doing, where they're going to have the retail on the first floor in revitalized business districts, housing and offices, second, third, fourth floors. Their building density, which will build the tax base, which will build the money coming in, and it will support the businesses. So it's a win-win for everybody. But if we start slowing these things down, if we do this in College Hill, if we do this in Madisonville, it's going to be almost impossible for them to recover. And, we're fighting right now to remain even. That's what I'm talking to you about tonight. But actually, I have a list that we got, and I think I've talked to most of you already about it. We call it Transforming Communities, Bigger, Better, Faster. And it is over $400 million worth of projects, most of which could be put together within 6 months and go. And they will be as transformative in individual communities as Washington Park has been in Over the Rhine. I mean, these are really exciting things. People have been working hard for years to do it. If we slow that down, we've got, and you guys may not know it, but I must have skipped over the list of our board members. We have all the smartest board members, smartest CDC executive directors on our board. These are young, smart people. If they can't do what they need to do, that frustration is going to cause a problem in and of itself. But we have got to find ways, get exciting, get outside the box, and make this stuff happen. We support very much Councilmember Winburn's notion of increasing the funding for the port. If you look at all of that, how much money these jobs would pay and how much city income tax, $6.5 million, that would generate, just think about what $400 million would generate in terms of increased property taxes increased, income taxes, all that kind of thing. And the city's share of that $400 million is probably going to be less than 20%. So less than $100 million, and it doesn't have to be spent all right away. It can be spent over years. But those promises, once you start to make those promises, they have to be kept. You can't just slice and dice. So, you know, the city is gap funding, but if that gap funding isn't there, then we're up a creek, because the banks are, you know, they're constrained by what they can loan in terms of loan to value, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of our projects are going to cost a little more initially until the neighborhood begins to make the comeback. I mean, Over the Rhine is now returning on investments, but those first couple of years, it didn't work out that way. So, what we're wondering is, what is Cincinnati going to look like tomorrow? What are we going to do? How are we going to make things happen? Without investment, we stop growing as a city. We continue to face these budget shortfalls every year. Are we going to continue to have blighted buildings? Are they going to increase? Or are we going to increase our momentum and build the Cincinnati we all know we can become? Let's make that pie bigger, and thank you very much.
Patricia, can you hold on? Can you stay right there? Now, this is what I'm going to do for my very fine colleagues, and I'm asking you if you could just stay within the boundaries. We're only going to have a 10-minute presentation by the city administration, and we're going to adjourn. I wanted to do this because all 8 members of this council, including myself, I believe everyone has a heart to do the right thing. We couldn't meet everybody's needs, but I believe in the future, as we move forward, we'll be able to address many of those concerns. I'm going to ask each one of my colleagues if you would just take 1 minute and give a 1-minute response on your desire to continue to support as we move forward in the future on expanding development corporations. Now, I'll be asking the administration right after our budget is put to bed to begin, and I'm going to ask the mayor and this council to begin to work on a 5 to 7 year business plan that will create jobs, expand our neighborhood business districts, and expand our development corporations specifically in those areas. This city needs a business plan. And so that's my 1-minute presentation. So I'll start with our illustrious vice chair. Each one of my colleagues, if you so desire to have a 1-minute response, I wanted to give my colleagues that opportunity at this time.
Thank you. I would ask first if we can get a copy of that presentation, maybe mailed to our offices. That'd be great to look at. And I second what Councilman Burns said. I think we need to look at a 5 to 7 year plan and see what we can do in all of those areas, because I think this is something we need to look at long term. And I'm glad that we were able to put some of the funding back in, and we need to do a better job, so we do need to look at it long term. Thank you.
Let me take 1 second, Charlie, if you don't mind. So one of the things we right now, the money that we pass through you guys to our 210 CDCs is all money for housing development. We need the same kind of cash flow for operating support for economic development, particularly because a lot of neighborhoods are moving that direction. But if we did it without expanding the pie, it would be just taking half of the housing money and making it for community development or for economic development. So that's another reason the pie needs to expand.
Thank you. Whose next colleague would like to speak? Vice Mayor Mann.
Pat, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And you do get my attention when you make the point that we can't have a holiday and expect to come back and pick up where we were, that by having a holiday and reduce funding, we lose a lot of ground that's going to take some time to make up. So I do think I'm not sure we have the luxury of whatever we do about developing a 5 to 7 year plan. I think we need to take a look at what we can do in the months immediately ahead. Once we get past the budget decision, let's circle back around and see what else we can do. But thank you very much.
Any additional council member? Silva?
Well, Mr. Chair, if it's still the intention of this council to pass our entire operating budget and the entire budget tomorrow, then I have a lot of questions since yesterday that I need to ask to the administration. So I don't know if it's not the case that we're intending to pass the entire budget tomorrow, then I'll hold off. But if not, I'd like some time, more than 1 minute, to ask the questions I have. In terms of the CDC And Ms. Garry, I think what you said is exactly what my priority is, which is neighborhood development. And the importance of planning is very much a part of that. I support our planning department and all of the things you're doing, but at some point, as you said, there's projects that could start literally 6 months from now because they've been planned so much, because there have been reports and studies. So at some point, it's just a matter of priorities. Are we going to fund you or not? And if we just keep studying it, I think that's the answer. So, I appreciate the comments, but at some point, it's just funding or no funding. And my answer is funding, which is why, I came up with a motion for the CMBDU, and I support the gap financing that gets us, $1 of our money for $7 of private dollars. So, I think it's time for action and less reporting and plans. But again, as Mr. Winburn pointed out earlier, I am one of only 9 members, and you have to have at least 5 votes. So I'm going to continue fighting for your group and neighborhood development action.
Yes,
Thank you.
and thank you, Mr. Silbach. I always say to any of my colleagues, if you have the strategic ability to persuade other members of council to believe in your ideology and philosophy, get you 5 votes, and we can always look at anything with 5 votes. Anyone else? Councilmember Yvette Simpson?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm going to try to do this in 1 minute. I still have 2 outstanding questions on this issue. I actually was looking for a way to restore the entire $900,000, and I requested of the administration, 1, a list of all the projects that would be impacted by this $4.5 million that we're cutting, because we're not just talking about $900,000, we're talking about $4.5 million. That's a lot of impact. So I wanted to see, so that we can see very clearly what that is funding. Still waiting on a response on that one. And then also, are there projects in the capital budget for 2015 that any portion of them could be delayed until 2016, so that we could clear the way for the funding? Because the reality is we anticipate having the money next year. We don't this year, and as you know, you approve capital funding for projects, and they're not even going to have a shovel for a whole year. We don't want that money sitting around when clearly there are projects right now, and so still waiting on an answer to that question. And so hopefully there will evolve, or we will get an answer to both of those questions, so we will know whether there's another at least $400,000 so we can fully fund it. I am and did sign, fully supportive and did sign Councilmember Seelbach's motion to support the $500,000 because he had a source of funds, and I thought it was a good source of funds. But I do think there would be, hopefully, in the capital budget, the ability to completely restore the $900,000.
I can talk about that.
Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to just let them have it. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Won't you just take 1 minute to respond? Then we're going to go Mr. Sittenfield and then Mr. Young.
In the list of cuts, I've been with the city administration about what those are. Most of them are little pots. They're very tiny, most of them. I mean, $250,000 and up. But they are money that if you're in the middle of a project and you suddenly find that there's an extra, that there's, some environmental problem over here, and the project's all ready to go, you can take that little bit of money. If there's, they're doing downtown housing and there's suddenly a problem, or you need another unit, whatever kind of thing. There's so many of those where it's something that doesn't fit the guidelines can come out of all of these. Every one of these is like that. If the market housing stuff, in terms of the cuts, there's 2 of those line items. There won't be a City Rama after this year, and there's just it's tiny money, but it comes in where, like in Spring Grove Village, they're trying to do something, or on Spring Grove Avenue, they're trying to do something, and you're suddenly stuck, and everything's ready to move. That's where that money comes from. So it's just little teeny pieces. It's made a terrific difference over the years.
Mr. Sittenfield, you have a minute, if you like it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I enjoyed getting to sit down with Ms. Garry about a week or 2 ago. I think she and all the CDCs across the city lead really important work. I don't have a huge amount to add beyond what my colleagues have said, which I mostly agree with. One just sort of broad point I would make for the administration, who I realize gets about 50 different directions from council. We say, don't lay anyone off and give us all this money to do exciting economic development projects. And we often give conflicting and challenging policy directives. The one thing I think is just a big picture thing, and Ms. Garry, you mentioned the Port Authority and the growth that it could leverage. I do think in future years, one of the bigger favors you all can do, council, and this is why I put that port motion together in the first place, is to the extent possible, and that's a big clause right there, because sometimes certain things aren't possible, start with the investment and then layer on the things that don't necessarily represent investment. I mean, and I realize there's obviously a distinction between the capital and the operating side of the budget, but if something is going to a worthy need and it's in the budget, it makes it challenging to take that away, because it's going to go and do good things, but a year later, that money might be gone. You got a year worth of worthy service, but versus, investing in projects that are going to do what we all know and agree the city needs to do, and that's grow our way to success. So I think, and again, it's a fine line, it's a balance. I think you all have done overall a very creative, good job putting this year's budget together, but to the extent that you can start by baking into what you give to the mayor and give to council the things that represent investment, the things on which there will be ROI, I think that's a favor both to council and ultimately to the citizens.
Mr. Young and Mr. Smithman followed, and then followed by our last comment. Where's Mr. Flynn? Okay, yes.
Yeah. My comments will be brief. I've met with Ms. Garry several times before. She knows I'm on board with everything she has to offer. Anything else I said would be pretty much redundant. But I think the thing that I do want to add, because I'm so very proud of Cincinnati, and one of the reasons I am, is because of the kind of work that you and other people do that makes Cincinnati desirable. But I was at a city Rama this morning, and one of the things that we always talk about is the fact that one of the ways to make Cincinnati more desirable is to give people good choices they can make here, in addition to where they live, where they can work, where they can play, the whole ball of wax. That can't happen without organizations like yours. And your work has a proven track record. There should not be a real question about the funding. The issue simply is where the money's going to come from. Like my colleagues said, we give our administration a bazillion different directions on what they need to do with this money. But it's beyond me that we can't find money to fund this, because this is the way we bring people into the city who will make the necessary investments to rebuild our neighborhoods, increase our tax base. It creates those jobs and everything else we want to do to make Cincinnati desirable. So I don't want to keep being redundant. I know I'm repeating what everybody else has had to say, but I'm on board with that. Let's just find the money.
Okay. My dear friend, Mr. Smithman. Okay, thank you, Mr. Smithman. First of all, thank you, and thank you for having the heart to come to serve all the citizens of Cincinnati, and we're going to work together, and we can put this beginning now in a 5 to 7 year plan, and we won't ever be here, hopefully, again. Thanks a million. At this time,